I'm going to show some intriguing connections which suggest Atlantis might have been the basis for the calculations of the Earth. If you've been following this channel, you know we take Olof Rudbeck's argument seriously, that the Atlantis described by Plato maps onto the Scandinavian peninsula. Modern etymologists acknowledge the Greek word for island, Nisos, used for the mythological islands, may trace back to an Indo-European root, meaning headland or cape, in other words, synonymous with a peninsula. We have gone over how the reading of the measurements of Atlantis, the 2000 times 3000 stadia, more naturally reads as a length, meaning the top side is 3000 and the bottom side 2000. If you just look at the word-for-word translation, you can see here that on the one hand, the side on the top, being upon, is 3000, and then downwards from the middle, upwards from the sea, 2000. So it's a top side and bottom side. That's the straightforward natural reading. And the modern translations, those are the ones that have to do complicated interpretations to get the other measurement to do the across measurement. This quite plainly states one top side and one bottom side. This is a 5000 stadia length, and this 5000 you will see is very, very important in some of the connections I'm going to make here. And you may ask, why was Atlantis only the length? And it actually has a very historical reason. Because in history, when we didn't have good measuring tools, the only visible natural phenomena which securely lands you a degree on Earth is the latitude, where you have height of the pole star or comparing sun hours. Those give you a quite precise latitude. There's no such easily observable natural phenomena which determines your longitude. It is of course possible, but not easily. That's why the latitude was quite common, and the longitude, when it happened, was often misplaced, which I've shown in the Ptolemy's map, which was very distorted in the longitudinal direction. So the 5000, this is the base for which the calculations of the Earth was made by Eratosthenes. He used it from Alexandria to Cyan, which he defined as 5000 stadia. The question is, did he measure this distance physically or from a conversion of an angle of the Earth, meaning from the pole star or a comparison of sun hours? This is an ongoing debate even today. But this is my 2 cents that this is actually simply an angle that was converted into stadia, not a physical measurement. First, we have to define the degree. And before Ptolemy and during Ptolemy, he said that 1 degree on the Earth was 500 stadia. And then after him, the one we also use today, we say 600 stadia instead per degree. You should convert stadia lengths into degrees using this conversion, not this one that we use today. And it actually lands you different results. For instance, if you divide 5000 by 500, you get 10 degrees using the old system. And in the new system, 5000 divided by 600, you instead get 8.1 degree. So, mapping it onto the Scandinavian peninsula, this was a problem I had before, when I didn't know that there was this difference between the pre-Ptolemaic and the post-Ptolemaic definition of a degree length. Then I didn't understand why this was too small, but it's because you should actually divide it by 500 stadia instead. And then you get this 10 degrees, which is the length of the Scandinavian peninsula. And look at this. This is 8.1 degree too small. So this is 1/6 too small. And this 1/6 is very important. It will come up later in this presentation. And what is very interesting is that the proportional relation of these two lengths is 60% on top and 40% on the bottom. And it actually maps out onto the Scandinavian peninsula if the capital of Atlantis was Uppsala, because then it's 43% at the bottom and 56% at the top, which is a difference of just 3.3%. And this is therefore very close indeed. You can see very well how the 3000 stadia and the 2000 stadia are just rounded numbers. And Uppsala is of course very known for its plains. And as you may know, Uppsala was like the pagan capital of the north in the pagan times. Now, this is also very important to understand. Plato did not say that Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia put together. That is a misreading if you just look at the Greek. Because in Timaeus it says today in the modern translation that it is larger than Libya and Asia put together. But in Critias, they today say that it only says larger than Libya and Asia. So then you compare them separately and not together combined as one larger region. And if you look at the Timaeus source, you can see that in context it reads together, but in isolation the Greek reads, if you use polytranslator, and the island was larger than both Libya and Asia. The together is a secondary reading. If you look at the word used, it's primarily at the same time, and the secondary meaning is together with. And if you look at the Perseus Greek word study tool, you can see that it mostly means at the same time. So if we read the primary meaning, the passages align. Both read larger than Libya and Asia. Not together, but separately. He just used two instances, two examples. If Plato meant one landmass, he would have chosen adjacent regions. He of course was learned enough to do that. Their separation mirrors the main meaning of this word, at the same time, not together. He's saying at the same time, just as in Critias. So Asia is not this modern understanding. It is the Asia Minor, which is 9 degrees thereabouts, just under 10 degrees, just as these lands were supposed to be just a bit smaller than Atlantis. And Libya was to the west of Egypt historically, and this is also just a bit under 10 degrees. The first Libyans were the Berbers, west of Egypt, and the Berbers looked like this. From the right, Egyptian, an Assyrian, Nubian, and 4 Libu men. These are Scandinavians, blue-haired and blonde-eyed. Blue-haired and blonde-eyed. Blonde and blue hair. And these Libyans came from a peninsula homeland, as you can see in Maximus of Tyre. The Hesperian Libyans inhabit a land narrow and long, and on all sides surrounded by the sea, for the external sea being divided about the summit of its neck. Right? Now, just beside Libya, this measurement was made, this 5,000, which was then supposedly, I say, a convention from the Libyans that traveled to North Africa. I just want to let you know that I am changing the name of this channel to North and Below. And that is because I'm soon releasing book 1 of these books, which you know what it is if you follow this channel. Olof Rudbeck's Atlantica. This is book 1 in modern Swedish, and from there I will soon be able to release it in English as well. And this will all be one package of the Nordic Islands project, which will be my website. But in 1 week's time, or 2 weeks' time, if you see North and Below, then you know this is my channel. And now, this 5,000 stadia length has a mystery to it, because in Rudbeck's book, there are 3 instances where instead of 5,000, it says 600 stadia instead. And this 600 stadia actually maps on to the geography being described in the internal logic of the texts much better than 5,000 stadia. In Plutarch's Ogygia, it in modern sources says that the distance to the mainland is 5,000 stadia, while Rudbeck writes 600. And the problem with the 5,000 stadia is that the sea around Ogygia is supposed to receive mud from the mainland, which suggests that the sea is very close to the mainland. If it is 5,000 stadia outwards, then it's very far out into the open ocean. How the hell can that receive mud from the mainland? Right? It has to be somewhere close, which this 600, then it reads as being quite close, right? And in the Eratosthenes, again, the same guy who made the measurements of the Earth, he has a meridian from Egypt to Thule, and in one of the distances, the Mediterranean to Dnieper, it says 5,000 stadia in modern sources, while Rubek again writes 600 instead. So in his version it says 600 and not 5,000. And do not take Rubek for trying to lie. This is of course a reading that he made, and I will show that this 600 is actually not accidental at all. It is sexagesimal in nature, and I will show you what that is. And then there's a third in Strabo's description of the Caspian Sea. Its width is said to be 5,000 stadia. And again, Rubek accidentally writes 600. There are 3 identical mistakes or instances, meaning that it is systematic. And I've shown that in at least 2 of these sources, 600 is more coherent. Now, one stadion is defined as 600 foot. We had 600 stadia mistake here, and one stadion is 600 foot, so this is base 6. 600 miles is about 5,000 stadia. So here you have the same ratio, 600 and 5,000. They are the same length, the same ratio. And before we continue, we have to define what a stadia is. There's no agreed upon length of the stadia, and depending on the situation, different stadia fits. But the most common one used today is the 185 meters. So if you use the standard stadia, then 600 Roman miles is 888 kilometers, while 5,000 stadia is 925. So this is a 4% difference, practically the same. You could treat it as the same when you use these long distances. But here's a very interesting thing. If you use Rubek's definition of a stadion, you instead get 891 kilometers, right? This is a 0.3% difference. This is definitely the same. And what did he define a stadion as? He defined a stadion as 300 ells, 300 forearms, you could say. And as I said, the stadia is not very agreed upon, and there's also a definition of 177 meters for a stadion. So from about 177 to 185, you have an acceptable length. So if we use this definition of a stadion, then 5,600 has the same value, just as in the mix-up, these two have the same value. Something is happening here, because if you divide 5,000 by 600, you get 8.1/3. This looks a bit familiar, this number, right? Do you remember? When we looked at the beginning, the modern degree length gets 5,000 stadia to be 1/6 too small on the Scandinavian peninsula, 8.3 degrees. This is the exact same number because we again used the same number. This is why it's so interesting, right? It's 5,000 divided by 600, just as we used here. The exact same thing is going on here. So what is actually going on here? Something is going on here. You must admit that, right? If you look at a Roman mile, 1 mile is 8 stadia, eerily close to 8.3. But this is if we use the standard definition of 185 meters per stadion. What if we use Rubek's stadia instead? Then we get 8.3 stadia. Isn't that very, very interesting? There are dots being connected here. So, if we look at the definitions of a degree, in Ptolemy's time it was 500 stadia per degree. In our modern times it's 600. And Eratosthenes used 700 instead. And the jump up is always by a 1/6. What is happening here? I had no idea for a very long time, but now I've found that this is because Hellenistic geography was sexagesimal in nature, used base 60. That is exactly what's happening here. And the conversion from 5,000 to 600 uses base 60 as well. One of the standard historians in this subject is Otto Nogebar, who said the mere fact itself of Babylonian influences on Hellenistic astronomy is obvious. It suffices to mention the all-pervading use of the sexagesimal system, for instance in the reckoning of time or in the division of the circle. So the reckoning of time uses the division of the circle because the roundness of the Earth is a circle, right? So then it's easy to divide it by base 60. That's for instance why we have 12 hours in a day. It is also base 60. That's why we have 360 degrees. That is base 60. That is what the whole geographic system is based on. So here I'm showing you that the conversion from mile to stadia is this base 60, because 1 Roman mile, as we said, is 8.3 stadia, and it's the same thing as saying 10 stadia minus a sixth. And 10 stadia minus a sixth is the same as saying 50 sixths. This is the ratio of conversion from stadia to mile. 50 sixths. Can you say that? 50 sixths. Do you say that? I don't know. But yeah, this is the ratio. So if 1 Roman mile was 10 stadia, then it would be 60 sixths, would be 10 stadia. But instead it is 50 sixths, which lands you at 8.3 stadia. So this is the whole number, 60. This is sexagesimal, or base 60 in nature. This follows the system of Hellenistic geography. So again, the conversion ratio is 8.3 or 50 sixths. So 5,000 divided by 600 is 8.3 or 56. And 1 mile is 8.3 stadia, and 5,000 stadia divided by 8.3 gives you 600 miles. This is the conversion ratio, and that is what is happening here. That is the mix-up. So this points to the 600 stadia that Rubek found in his sources to actually be real, that is not random. It's sexagesimal in relation to 5,000. Which suggests it's part of the internal logic of ancient sexagesimal geodesy. And the 600 stadia actually works better internally in the texts, for at least 2 of the 3 sources. I've explained how it works perfectly in Thule and overshoots severely with 5,000 stadia. But why did 600 become 5,000? How can that be possible? I'm still not really sure, but here's my hypothesis. Did some scribers see the 600 stadia from the mainland, in Ogygia that is, and thought the distance was much too short, since they thought that the mythological islands was supposed to be out in the open ocean, far away from the sea, right? That's how they imagined it. So especially on Ogygia, which was supposed to be 5 days sail west of England in the open ocean, right? And figured that it ought to read instead 600 miles instead of 600 stadia, which is the same, as we said, as 5,000 stadia. It works. I don't know if that is what happened, but that is the 50/6 ratio in action. 1 point. Ogygia can just as well read 5 days sail from England in the west. I will show this in a video on Ogygia on its own later. And one important point is that the 600 stadia might be the same as saying 1 degree, because that is our modern system, right? We say that 1 degree is 600 stadia. So this is exactly 1 degree. But if you use the pre-Ptolemaic or the Ptolemaic system, then it's 500 stadia for 1 degree, right? And I've actually found one source, which is Philemon Holland's version of Moralia in 1603, which instead of either 5,000 stadia or 600 stadia, instead says that it is 500 stadia from Ogygia to the mainland. Here. Ogygia 500 stadia, or thereabout, to the mainland. So there's of course the obvious objection that this is just a mistake, that I read 5,000 and mistakenly took away 10, making it 500. That of course can happen, but again, it might be that the original sources had the angles written down, not the stadia. And then using different systems, you convert it to stadia. So perhaps it said 1 degree in the original sources, and then it was converted for easier reading for the readers. That is again just a hypothesis. I'm not saying this is what happened. I'm just laying out what I found and some theories, basically. So again, back to Eratosthenes and his 5,000 as a base for calculating the measurements of the Earth. In modern academia, it is very contested whether this was measured physically or if it converted an angle into 5,000 stadia. My theory is that the 5,000 stadia is a convention that was moved there to Libya from the Libyans, which are Scandinavians. These blue-haired, blonde-eyed Libyans, or Berbers, barbarians, coming from this peninsula homeland. Here is a timetable of all the instances of 5,000 stadia so far that I found, and these are the 3 where Rubik instead reads 600. So this is a sexagesimal conversion happening from 5,000 to 600. So the oldest source of this 5,000 is actually the Atlantean source. And this source we can surmise was an angle to begin with, because they of course did not measure this distance physically. And then comes Eratosthenes, which we can surmise inherited this stadian length from the Libyans. And from there it was converted into 600 Roman miles. And from there we only have 600. In the sources that Rubik reads. So something happened here when the Swedes, the Suebi are the Swedes, according to Rubik. I will show how this works out later when we talk about the Germans and their Scandinavian origin. So this 600 miles comes from the Scandinavians as well. So it might be that 600 and 500 both come from Scandinavia, therefore this number was mixed up. That is the working theory I have right now, and I will continue discussing this when I find more. But that is all for today. The working hypothesis is that this measurement was not measured physically, but was a conversion or a convention inherited by Eratosthenes. Thank you so much for this time, and I will see you soon.